Watch your notebook. There's more.
Welcome to CN Live, Season 7, Episode 2. The U.S. bombs Iran, and what's next? I'm Joe Lauria, Editor-in-Chief of Consortium News. Well, the U.S. has finally done it. On Saturday night, U.S. time, Sunday morning early, in Iran, U.S. B-2 bombers dropped a number of 30,000-pound bombs, and submarines fired cruise missiles on two other nuclear installations. The B-2 bombers dropped them on Fodor, the one buried in a mountain. But we really don't know at this point what the damage was done. Donald Trump says everything was obliterated. He's known for hyperbole, obviously. The big question, of course, then, after we discuss what exactly happened last night, is how Iran will react to this. And we want to thank our guests, Ray McGovern and Scott Ritter, for extremely short notice to join us on this extremely important occasion. As I said, Trump said that I'm quoting him, it was a spectacular military success. Iran's, quote, key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Well, the photos that we've seen doesn't seem to show that. It looks like the entrances may have been blocked, and the IAEA says there's no leaks. Apparently, Russia also says, from their assessment, there wasn't severe damage. We haven't really heard from Iran yet, at least I haven't so far. So Trump seems like he wants to end this right now. And will it? Let's have Ray McGovern come in. Ray, what is your assessment right now of what the damage was done? And then we'll move on to the question of how Iran should respond, and also political questions are surrounding what the U.S. has done.
Well, thanks, Joe. What I would say is that the emphasis that Trump and others have put on this issue has all to do with Iranian enrichment. It has nothing to do with constructing a nuclear bomb, okay? That's really important, okay? The reason that's important is because people don't know, the people who read the New York Times, they don't know that in 2007, the intelligence community unanimously and with high confidence declared that Iran had stopped working on a nuclear weapon in 2003 and had not resumed work on a nuclear weapon. To my delight, to my gratitude, my old friends there in the CIA stood firm on that up until March of this year, when Tulsi Gabbard, the new National Intelligence Director, said precisely the same thing. If you need bipartisan on this, check out what Bill Burns, the CIA director under Biden, said. I don't know, maybe it was a qualm of conscience for all the lies he told, about Putin having lost in Ukraine 2 years ago, this kind of thing. But what he said was, look, before I go out, and this was 2 weeks before he left office, before I go, remember, Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon. And what I said in October still applies, namely, that were they to start working on a nuclear weapon, we would find out exactly very, very quickly. And so don't worry about it. We got all these cameras working in these places. We have all these satellite, not just photos, infrared, radar, we got it all, and we're going to know right away. So what is this all about? It's not about uranium enrichment. It's about regime change. Now, yeah, they can destroy Fordo. I don't think they have. I mean, as you point out, Trump does exaggerate. My God. But it doesn't really matter. The Ukrainians are not, my God, I have to wake up here. The Iranians are not going to change their regime because of what happened early this morning. So if that's the objective, it's ipso facto going to fail. And the worst, of course, is that the Russians and the Chinese, well, let's just put it this way. The old way we used to say it is they cannot sit idly by, nor can the rest of the world, because of the danger that that Strait of Hormuz could be sealed and the world economy go kaplop.
Well, Ray, the proof that for Israel this has always been about regime change is that the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, actually contained Iran's enrichment to 3.67%. It was working. There's nothing problem with it. Why was Israel so upset with it? Couldn't stop Obama from going through with it. And then finally, Netanyahu talked Trump into scrapping or getting the U.S. out of it. Why? Because it didn't overthrow the government. It made them stronger, more secure, actually, the JCPOA. Let me move to Scott. Scott, he says it was totally obliterated. What do you know about what damage was done from what you've seen, and what sources have you looked at to tell you that?
Well, I mean, there's some Maxar imagery out there, but I don't know the veracity of that. We have anecdotal information coming out of Iran, but three sites were hit. The Ferdo site, six B-2 bombers, each carrying two 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrators. Um, According to the Iranians, succeeded in damaging one entrance and one exit in a facility that has five entrances and exits. Moreover, they struck an empty facility. There is, again, satellite imagery of unknown veracity, which appears to show that the Iranians evacuated the totality of anything valuable from Firdos on June 18th and 19th. So no matter what we hit an empty shell. People need to understand that I keep saying Firdos. That's just because I'm an ignorant American early in the morning on a Sunday. Fordo is the appropriate pronunciation. I've been educated on that one. So, but Fordo, if you study the history of it, and when the Iranians made its initial declaration, there was a lot of controversy. How dare the Iranians dig and build this site without telling the IAEA? And the Iranians said, "You guys don't understand. This site was already dug and built. It was done as part of a different project, how to safeguard all of our other material from bombing. But we decided that we're going to take this facility and convert it to an underground enrichment facility to protect it because of the threats made by the United States and others." The reason why I bring that up is you need to understand that Iran is full of Firdos, Fordo. Literally, the entire country is one big, giant underground storage facility. And the totality of Iran's critical infrastructure has been removed from the physicality of locations and stuffed away in different heights. So if the goal was to stop enrichment, they stopped nothing. Nothing. They may have delayed it. They may have, complicated things. But if the goal was to deny Iran the ability to enrich uranium, first of all of the uranium enriched by Iran has been removed from these sites, Natanz, Fordo, and others, and hidden in these other places that we don't know anything about. We don't know where they are. So we haven't eliminated any of the enriched material. So the threat that allegedly exists from the 60% enriched uranium that everybody said, one more enrichment cycle gives you the 90% necessary for a bomb. All that exists. None of that has been destroyed. None of it has been destroyed. Moreover, we don't know if there's additional centrifuge facilities that could be stood up. We do know that the Iranians stopped sharing centrifuge production data with the IAEA last year, and that Iran has had the ability to produce IR6, IR8 advanced centrifuges in numbers that nobody knows anything about, unaccounted for. And those aren't sitting in the Natanz waiting to be blown up. They've been secreted away. So this strike is nonsensical in terms of achieving the stated objective of the strike. Is this about regime change? Well, there's no doubt that this is about regime change. The Israeli preemptive attack, the Pearl Harbor event, recognized that Israel would not be able to eliminate Iran's nuclear program. The Israelis admitted this up front. We can't do it. without American help. So why did they attack unilaterally? Twofold. One, because they believed by carrying out a decapitation strike, which this was a decapitation strike, there was an attempt on Ali Khamenei's life that night. Their goal was to kill him and his senior IRGC leadership, leaving a weakened, chastened president and foreign minister to fall on their knees and beg for let us live. Then they did the shock and awe where they blew up facilities without really blowing them up, just a lot of smoke and flame, etc. They had the Mossad fly drones around and do things. And they thought that the whole combined effect would put Iran into a state of shock and they would capitulate. And you saw that with the pathos of Netanyahu's follow-on plea. Do nothing. Let us finish the destruction of your nuclear facilities, and we will learn to live in peace. That was literally what the Israelis said. The Iranians said something different, like stick it in your ear and here's some missiles to say good morning. And they've been saying good morning with missiles ever since. So regime change failed. So now Israel has to go into the next phase of this operation, which is to lure America into this conflict. And here they've been very successful. The proof is in the pudding. I will just say something though. This is Iran's fault. I know this is an unpopular thing to say, and people are like, "How dare you?" But as you pointed out, the JCPOA capped Iran's program at 3.75%. Why? Because that's what made sense for a nuclear enrichment program. Now, once the JCPOA was walked away from, Iran expanded it to 20%. Why? Because Iran needed fuel for their Tehran research reactor. Legitimate. Then Iran began to enrich at 60%. Not legitimate. Not illegal, but not legitimate. When people say, when you have Burns and company say, Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program, that is a fallacy. Because what Iran did starting last year was to create a nuclear threshold capability. And this is not deniable. People can say, no, they didn't. The Iranians admit they did. The Iranians said, yes, we did this to have leverage. I said, no, that's stupid. That's waving a red flag in front of Israel and the United States. And then when the bull charges, you get upset. So this is Iran's fault, 100% Iran's fault. Had they not created this threshold capability, then Netanyahu, Trump, and everybody else couldn't come up with they're on the cusp of a nuclear weapon. Because as I wrote in your publication last October, Joe, Iran was a nuclear power at that time. No truer words have ever been written by anybody who's been published in your paper. Because Iran had at that time become a nuclear power. All they needed was the decision. And the Iranians said, we can flip that decision in a moment. If you do that, you are a nuclear power. Now, to the credit of Iran, earlier this year, they walked away from that. In fact, if you listen to Ali Shamkhani before he was murdered by the Israelis, one of the lead Iranian negotiators, he said, we're ready to sign a treaty, not a fatwa, because nobody can trust the fatwa anymore. I don't trust the fatwa. Why don't I trust the fatwa? Because the Iranians said we can flip it at a moment. So the fatwa is meaningless. It's non-binding. The Iranians can do away with it instantaneously. That's why they were stupid to do what they did. But now they got common sense. They talked to the Russians. And they said, we're ready for a binding treaty. We will not have a nuclear weapons program. This will be written in law, treaty, etc. And we will agree to a cap of 3.75%. And we'll agree to American inspectors, and we will agree to many other things. So the Iranians were engaged in negotiations to undo the great mistake they made, and we should have let these negotiations finish, but we instead allowed Israel to initiate attack premised on something that was demonstrably false. No matter what justification Israel might have had to call Iran a threshold state, the fact that Iran was engaged in negotiations at the time of the strike means Iran wasn't a threshold state anymore. And that's the fallacy of the whole thing. We didn't destroy anything. We dropped 2 bombs on a facility already destroyed in Natanz. We fired 30 cruise missiles into the Isfahan complex. The U.S. government is already saying the warheads of the cruise missiles weren't sufficient to do the damage we were hoping to achieve in Isfahan. So that's a restrike. And if you're doing the whole battle damage thing, that means we got to bomb that again. And then there's Fordo, which apparently we didn't do a damn thing to. So that's a restrike too. With what? Because we already dropped 6 GBU-57s on it. The restrike would be with nuclear weapons. This is a dangerous path that we've entered into, a very dangerous path.
Before we move on, why did Iran move to 60%? What was their strategy there?
The strategy was to create leverage
Right.
That's literally the statement made by Morandi and other Iranian officials. It's to create
Right.
leverage to say, if you don't get back
Right.
to the business of negotiating in good faith, this potential exists. But the problem is, all that did is give people an excuse to bomb. And the proof
Yeah.
is what happened last night. This was
Uh,
going
What-
to happen no matter what with an Iranian threshold
Yeah.
Scott,
capability. Iran had no choice but to walk away from it.
yeah, Scott,
Yeah.
were the Iranians within their rights to enrich higher than 3.75? Was it okay for them to do that? Seems to me it was. Tell me why it wasn't.
Because there's no legitimacy attached to the 60%
Is
uranium.
it illegal?
And the Iranians then linked, excuse
Is
me,
it-
the Iranians then
what-
linked the 60% uranium. And let me finish, Ray. The Iranians then linked the 60% uranium to a threshold nuclear weapons capability. That is illegal. So when you do something, you can say, I have the legal right to do it, but then you say the reason why I'm doing it is to break the law, then that act becomes a facilitator of a crime. The Iranians were wrong. There is no justification at all for what the Iranians did, and they are to blame for this. I'm not going to give them a free pass. They created the conditions under which the United States and Israel were able to manufacture a case for war. And there's no way
you're not
Congress can
justifying.
intervene.
You're
Pardon?
not justifying what happened last night because they went
Oh,
to
hell
60.
no, I condemn it. I condemn it when I
Okay.
wrote for you. I condemned it ever since. But I'm not going to give the Iranians a free pass. They created the conditions under which this manufactured case could be conceived as being legitimate. There was no reason for them to have 60% in
But at the
uranium.
time that these negotiations with Trump began, were they still going at 60, or had they already stopped? Did they
Oh
already
no, they even doubled down on 60. They began to produce more 60% enriched uranium.
Okay.
Yeah,
Ray,
but-
sorry.
Yeah, let me just back up a little bit here. Morandi and others have said that this was to create some leverage. My God, who can fault them for trying to get some leverage against the U.S.? But Tulsi Gabbard and others have said that the U.S. is not, that the Iran's not working on a nuclear weapon, would find out about it very quickly. I don't know what your estimate, Scott, is, but what I've heard is it would take a year, maybe 3 years to get a nuclear weapon. Isn't that what it's all about? The enrichment thing is a diversion here, whether they're within their rights or not. Yeah, they attacked the enrichment facilities. Why didn't they attack the nuclear weapons manufacturing facilities? Because there aren't any. Doesn't that matter?
No, Ray, but there are, and the Israelis did attack them. I mean, let's just walk. Let me walk you through the Iranian bomb, because I know this like the back of my hand. All right, you have 60% enriched uranium. Now,
Right.
normally when we did the JCPOA, some of the time factors we associated with the inefficient IR1 centrifuges, very inefficient, long lead, a lot of waste. Those are gone, replaced by IR6, IR8 centrifuges, orders of magnitude more sophisticated and capable. So it would take literally 3 days to convert, 3 days, Ray, not 3 years, 3 days to convert 60% uranium into 90% uranium sufficient for one bomb. Within a period
Right.
of a week and a half, they'd have 5 bombs. That is a literal guarantee, 5 bombs worth of uranium hexafluoride. Now they have to convert that into metal. They have an Isfahan facility that can do that. They will have converted that into metal within a matter of days. Now we're talking about a week. Now they have at Parchan, they have warhead construction, which they have done, and the Iranians bragged about it. We have the warhead, they said, because it's a gun design, Ray. It's a gun design, and you know that is the simplest design in the world. There's no sophistication in the gun design. You wrap it in a delivery package. They already have the ceramic warheads that can withstand the heat. They already have missiles tested to that payload. Ray, this is something they would have a deployed missile in less than a month. That's
When
the
would we,
reality.
when would we learn about it? When would we learn that they started doing this?
The moment they diverted the 60% enriched
Okay,
uranium.
well, Bill Burns said last October that the moment they started working on a nuclear weapon, we would know about it. We would know about it very quickly, said Bill Burns. Now he's the head of the CIA. He's trying to cover his conscience here by warning the American people, look, they're not working on a nuclear weapon, and that matters because we'll detect it right away.
Ray, Bill Burns, again, with all due respect to Mr. Burns, he's not a frickin' inspector. He's a director of the CIA and a politicized one at that. He hasn't spent any time on the ground. Now, let me educate Mr. Burns as his people should have. You know what the delay is between IAEA verification of the 60% diversion? Days. Days, meaning they go in, they do a check on it, and then if the Iranians divert, they won't detect it till the next time they check. Now, that could be 3 days. They already have sufficient material for a bomb. The Iranians have no excuse here, and Bill Burns is speaking out his ass. I'm telling you that the diversion could have taken place, and the Iranians should never have allowed this to happen. They should never produce 60% enriched uranium. They should have capped it at 20%, because now with 20%, when you do that detection of diversion, because the JCPOA was never meant to do detection of 60% of uranium. It was meant to watch the Iranians walk their way up from 3.75%. And that you can't do without being detected the diversion. But once you get to 60% uranium, you can divert. That's the danger. The Iranians know this, and they were stupid to allow this to happen. And Bill Burns knows it, because if I were a member of Congress and he testified before me and he made that stupid statement, I would make him look like a frickin' it, because I know how the inspections work. I know what the timelines are attached to the inspections. And Bill Burns is making a political statement here. Iran is to blame for creating the conditions under which the United States could claim that Iran was on the cusp of having a nuclear weapon.
Yeah,
That's
Scott,
the reality.
you're the expert on that, but if I take what you're saying literally, then ever since 2007, when that estimate came out unanimously and with high confidence that Iran was not working on a nuclear weapon and hadn't been since 2003, that was somehow not really to the point. In other words, they could do this, as you say, in a couple of days. Now, let me just
No,
add,
again, how much 60% enriched uranium did they have in 2007, Ray? None.
well, let me just finish. Are you saying that what Bill Burns was referring to, of course, of all these satellites, not only imagery, but as you know, radar, multispectral, infrared. Are you saying that these satellites that hover over Iran and also drones and the multiplicity of cameras in many of these sites would not detect such a beginning of a nuclear weapons program very quickly, as Bill Burns said? You say that's a lie or just a mistake?
I'm guaranteeing you wouldn't detect it.
Okay.
First of all, the hexafluoride is in a container. The container is attached to the centrifuge. It then injects the hexafluoride into the centrifuge cascade, and then they collect it in a container on the other end. Those containers are moved around and stored. None of those satellites can tell me what's in that container, and they can't tell me if that container's been moved. The cameras that you're talking about were turned off. They were turned off because after the United States withdrew from the JCPOA, you keep referring to 2007. 2019 is your new benchmark, Ray. 2019, when the Iranians said we're no longer to comply with the JCPOA, and they began walking away from it, turning off the cameras, stopping the repetitive visits by the inspector. denying access to the inspectors as they were allowed to because these were additional protocols. I'm just saying that whatever happened in 2007, that was a 3.75% capped program with IR-1 centrifuges. The Iranians walked away from the so-called sunset clauses, that were going to drag out their ability to deploy new centrifuges for 20 years. And as soon as they walked away, those IR-1s and the standard of centrifuge capability attached to them went out the window. That's like going from a muzzle loader and calculating rate of fire of an infantry battalion going to an infantry battalion equipped with M16 rifles. All right? Suddenly your rate of fire goes up tremendously. You can't use 2007 calculations to calculate the reality of Iran's program in the fall of 2024.
Well, of course, it was repeated in March of 2025. Let me ask you this, Scott. I'm an Israeli.
No, it wasn't, though. It wasn't. I've read her words very carefully. It wasn't repeated in March 25. What she said were two simple statements. She said that the supreme leader had not made a decision to produce nuclear weapons. That's the truth. And she said there's no evidence that Iran has begun to produce nuclear weapons. That's the truth. But then she went on to say Iran's increased 60% enriched uranium and other things caused concern that they could go in that direction.
Right, right. But that's enrichment. I'm talking about nuclear weapon. Now,
It's
let me
very
just
the
draw
gun
this thing
design is
out.
the easiest design.
I'm sorry?
We didn't test it. We didn't test the gun design. The whole
Okay.
Manhattan program,
All
we
right.
didn't test it. Why? It doesn't need to be tested. It's a guaranteed outcome.
Now, we know that Netanyahu is tuned into this program, right? So he's going to take away from this. Whoa, damn. They have this highly enriched uranium, and they can get a weapon within 3 days or 4 days or something like that if they want to. My God. Is that the lesson that Netanyahu is going to take from this discussion?
Don't
And
ask me to go to Netanyahu's
what's the
brain.
implications of that? What are the implications of that? Will he try something like a preemptive strike? He has some nuclear weapons too. What will he do if he thinks that Iran is on the cusp, that it will be days or weeks, not years or months, before Iran can mount a sufficient amount of highly enriched uranium at 90% onto a delivery vehicle that has a newly constructed warhead necessary to carry this into
Ray,
Israel? What's it?
I don't know what Israel will do, but I'll tell you what the United States will do.
Okay,
And you
that's
know
good.
what the United States will do. Why are you asking a rhetorical question?
What are they going to
You
do?
know the answer. We will use nuclear weapons to eliminate that threat before it manifests itself.
Oh,
That's
wow.
it.
We use nukes.
Of
Hmm.
course we would. We know you know we would. We've said we would. No, Biden would. Obama would. We will not allow Iran to have a functional nuclear weapon. That is a statement of American policy declared over and over again, which is why Iran was foolish to get to the cut of having that weapon, because all they were doing is waving a red flag in front of the United States and Israel. Israel isn't going to nuke Iran. Israel doesn't need to nuke Iran because we have told the Israelis we will nuke Iran.
Whoa. So what we're talking about is not just U.S. policy. We're talking about Israel's policy, which is joined at the hip, and there's no flexibility on Trump's leverage over Israel not to do this. This is, in other words, we're so automatically joined at the hip with Israel that we said, no worries. In final analysis, if our bunker busters don't work, we'll use nukes. That's your position?
It's not my position, it's the position of the White House, Ray. You know the White House has said that if we can't destroy Fordo and we believe Fordo is operational and linked to a weapon, we will use a tactical nuke. That statement was made late last week. You know that. I'm not making stuff up, Ray. This is declaratory policy on the part of the United States of America. This is why this is so damn dangerous. This isn't a joke. We are on the cusp of something horrible about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, since
We
you
live
said
in a country that's ruled by maniacs. I mean, literally maniacs. I'm not here condoning this. I condemn it. But, if I knew this about U.S. policy, and I'm not linked in, it's not like I'm revealing national secrets here. This is all open source. Read the the nuclear posture review, read, the nuclear employment guidance, read all of this. We know what we're going to do. And the Iranians had to know that too. Do they think we're bluffing? Well, if we are, I don't want to find out. I don't want to take it to that level. I mean, maybe we are bluffing. Maybe we're not going to use the nuclear weapon. But you know what? We have bombed Iran's nuclear facilities. And that was a red line for the Iranians for escalation. Now, hopefully the Iranians will be mature about this and responsible about this and adhere to international law and not do anything precipitous. But now we've put the future of the world into the responsibility of the Ayatollahs. And I don't like that. I'd prefer the future of the world be in the hands of responsible American leaders, but we don't have responsible American leaders.
Scott,
I'm very angry, not at you, Ray. I'm very angry at the situation because this was avoidable. We would never have bombed Iran had Iran not gone to threshold status. We would never have bombed Iran. And Iran didn't get anything out of the leverage that they sought. It didn't bring about any of the changes they wanted. Iran could have early on entered into negotiations with the United States using the four corners of the position that they had laid out by Ali Shamkhani 2 days before he was murdered. If the Iranians had come in, say, in 2019 and said, we're willing to sign a treaty, no nuclear weapons, 3.75% cap, etc., we wouldn't be in the situation we're in today. So this is why I blame Iran. It takes two to tango. When you have an insane party, when you have a bull in the ring, don't climb in the ring and wave the red flag and then cry when the bull charges. And the United States and Israel were the bull in the ring. Iran should have stayed out of the ring.
Well, Scott, if we're going to blame Iran, we have to pretty much prove that Iran did something illegal. Do I understand you to say that they enriching to a higher percentage, 60%, was illegal or was it legal?
Ray, we don't have to prove they did something illegal, and you know that. To cite preemptive self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, using the Caroline Clause as interpreted by the U.S. Supreme Court, all we have to demonstrate is an imminent threat to our national security. In Iran, enriching to 60% and then making statements, declaratory statements, that they can reverse the fatwa on a moment's notice, that they have all the materials ready for a bomb that can be delivered within weeks. These are statements not from Burns or any American analyst. These are from the Iranians themselves. That is an imminent threat worthy of preemptive strike. I mean, my God, the Iranians literally built the case, a cognizable case for preemptive strike under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. They built the case. That's why I blame them.
Let me talk about Russia and China now. I think a lot is going to depend on how Putin and Xi react here. They haven't yet, as far as I know, but I just woke up. Maybe that's clear. What do you think, Scott? Do you think that the Russians are going to still kind of hold out the notion that you can really deal with the Trump regime? I have been big on saying they put a priority on that, especially with respect to Ukraine. Let's just mention Ukraine here. Uh, I think that Russian policy on Ukraine will change now under the impact of these strikes last night. What do you think?
I share this. I think the United States has thrown away any opportunity to have a negotiated outcome to this conflict, if there ever was that potential, because the distance between what the United States expectations are and Russia expectations are very wide. So even if we wanted to negotiate, Russia isn't going to yield, and so require us to bend. But now it's hopeless. We can never be trusted again. And let's bring in China and Taiwan. If you think there was a chance for a negotiated outcome to Taiwan, it's over. China doesn't care about us anymore. And if we play stupid games with Taiwan, like we are wont to do, and we promote Chinese or Taiwanese independence and all this, China will invade. I also think that by carrying out this action, we have taken away any pretext. People will no longer believe that if we just negotiate with America, we can forestall something. America can no longer be seen as a nation that negotiates in good faith. We are a nation that has committed perfidy. Perfidy is a war crime. We are a nation ruled by war criminals. We have carried out an illegal act of aggression And as you know, Judge Jackson of the Supreme Court, when he was the prosecutor at Nuremberg, declared that illegal wars of aggression are the highest war crime because from them all other war crimes are emanated. We are governed by a literal war criminal. We are a nation defined by our war crimes, and nobody will ever trust us again. And this is the long term. If we manage to avoid nuclear annihilation in the coming weeks because of the stupidity that we've done with Iran, we're going to live with the consequences of our actions going forward. And I want to remind people this is the time when we have to have negotiations because the last remaining arms control treaty expires in February of next year. And when it expires, there will be a nuclear arms race like we've never experienced that we can't afford. And when we're governed by this moron, excuse me, I thought I wouldn't go down that path. When we're governed by the current president of the United States, who is capable of making the most ludicrous decisions based upon the most shallow of justification. I mean, listen to his presentation. This is not the presentation of a rational actor. The words he uses are cartoonish in nature. They reflect the simplicity of his argument and his design. And now this is a man who's now going to be responsible for a massive nuclear arms race, trying to put in place a golden shield, a golden dome that's going to protect us from anything and everything, but will protect us from nothing. We are moving down a path, as I wrote in my book, Highway to Hell. We are literally on a highway to hell. And Joe, that's another article that I wrote for Consortium News that deserves more attention than it possibly got. But you know, when I write these things, it's not meant to be superfluous. There we go. Thank you, Ray. Highway to hell. That's it. We are on a highway to hell.
Yeah, I just want to kind of broaden this thing out. If there's no nuclear explosions or no nuclear strikes in Iran, which I think the odds still favor, then there's the threat of closing the Straits of Hormuz. That would lead to a international economic crisis. Now, Trump sort of enjoys making international economic crises, but the Russians and the Chinese and the Europeans, you can call them brain dead, which I do, but they depend on the Gulf of Hormuz as well. So there are larger equities here, and I think you agree with this, Scott, that the most immediate deleterious effect of this, what happened last night, is that Putin is not going to be able to stave off his more excited people that Putin said himself 2 months ago. You know, a lot of people want me to go quicker, want me to go faster in Ukraine, but we're doing just fine. Well, I think that the game is over in Ukraine as well because Putin is not going to be able, even if he wanted to negotiate with a Trump that is so not only unpredictable, but so emotional. Emotional overload is what Putin's spokesperson said, Dmitry Peskov. So I think we're all a little bit guilty of emotional overload. But my God, what's going to happen when Ukraine falls apart? Is Trump going to do something even more stupid with respect to Ukraine?
Well, the good news is that let's go back to Iran just for a second because you mentioned the Strait of Hormuz. The good news is that the Iranians have been assiduous in acting in full accordance with international law. Unlike the United States, Iran, for instance, when they were attacked, they did what they're required to do under the United Nations Charter and notify the Security Council and report to the Security Council and seek Security Council intervention. But because that didn't come, then Iran is fully permitted under international law to carry out retaliation designed to remove the imminent nature of the threat posed to it. And so long as Israel continues to strike Iran, that threat is literally imminent and ongoing. So Iran's military actions against Israel are 100% in conformity with international law. Iran now has done the same thing, having been struck by the United States. They've made a request for a Security Council meeting, which means they are again applying to the letter of the law. Closing the Strait of Hormuz would be a mistake by Iran because it would be a deviation away from their strict adherence to this. Because to close the Strait of Hormuz, in effect, enacts a blockade, which is an act of war, and they would have to link this act of war to an imminent threat. What threat are they responding to? And and I think they're going to talk with the Russians, and I think that hopefully the Russians will advise them, to that now is not the time. That you, for instance, if you're going to block the Strait of Hormuz, the nations that are impacted by it need to have played a role in an action against Iran. And right now, I think the way the United States constructed this most recent attack, the immediate neighbors of Iran are guilt-free, and so shutting the Strait of Hormuz is collective punishment, something that's impermissible under international law. So I don't know if they're going to do that. I hear a lot of talk about it. I wouldn't be surprised if they did it because, as you said, sometimes leaders have to act in accordance with the pressures that they're being placed under. And there's a tremendous amount of pressure within Iran. The parliament just passed a resolution recommending the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, but the parliament did say that this has to be agreed upon by the Supreme National Security Council, and that hasn't been done yet. And I don't believe it will be done until the foreign minister meets with Vladimir Putin, I believe, tomorrow, or maybe later today, depending on time changes. So we'll see. But as far as Putin and Ukraine go, I'll push back just a little bit. I think Putin's immune to internal pressure because I think he's in total control of the situation in Russia, meaning that they have a campaign right now. And remember, we don't know the we don't know the consultations that have taken place in shaping this campaign. But the foot is not off the gas pedal, and Ukraine is being hit by a strategic air campaign that is literally taking it apart, simultaneous with constant pressure on the front. I don't think there's anything more Putin needs to do. Ukraine is collapsing already. They literally it's collapsing. So he doesn't need to do something demonstrable. He just needs to continue this this campaign. But now it will be continued without the possibility of being modified, halted, curtailed by negotiation. I don't think there's any Western Putin again broadcast this clearly in statements he made at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum yesterday. I believe it was yesterday. He said, Ukraine is Russia. Therefore, we already own all of it. It belongs to us. That's a bold political statement that basically lays out the future of Ukraine. This is beyond getting rid of Zelensky, replacing him with a compliant government. Russia has made the case, and Putin seems to have backed it up, that this doesn't end until Ukraine is returned to Russia. So I think it's the end of Ukraine, and that's the price Ukraine pays for tying on to American and European coattails. And there's nothing the United States or Europe can or would be willing to do to prevent this. So I think this is the end of Ukraine.
No, Scott, I agree. I would start worrying were I Putin if my approval ratings went from 82% to 76%. I make a joke, of course. He is pretty much immune, right?
Yeah.
But what is he going to do now with this whole series of betrayals? I mean, you're going to talk about, the promise not to extend NATO. You're going to talk about the coup in Kiev. You can talk about Minsk. You can talk about all kinds of betrayals, okay? Betrayals in the real sense of the word. It's not the Russians claiming this, it's the U.S. betraying. Now the U.S. has betrayed Russia again. I'm sure that the U.S. didn't ask or tell Putin, look, we're going to do this, and get sort of a wink of the eye. So I think that Russia and China will be forced now to change their calculus about Trump. He may be willing to deal, but he's incredibly meretricious and untrustworthy. So I think they might even say, look, Mr. Trump, we have agreements with Iran. They're not mutual defense agreements, but we're going to defend Iran. If it comes to the use of nuclear weapons, we're in. Then What's Trump and his crazy advisors going to do?
Well, that's the kind of existential move that Russia has long avoided. Russia doesn't have a history of allowing the existential status of the Russian nation to be subordinated to an outside power. So I don't believe Russia will attach a nuclear umbrella to Iran. Um, Russia's a big fan of what they say we will asymmetrical responses. That's a term Russia has used repeatedly throughout this Ukrainian conflict. We will respond, our response will be decisive and asymmetrical. Um, Now, Russia has put a marker down about regime change. Don't try it. But I don't see Russia extending the nuclear umbrella because Russia's not in the business. First of all, there's no legal authority to do that. Putin can't do that on his own. He would have to go to the Duma, and there would have to be a whole bunch of discussion. And Russia, like Iran, is a nation that does believe in international law and trying to promote it. Remember, it was Putin and Xi that met in February 4th of 2022, where they put out a 5,000 word statement where they said, we reject American rules-based international order in favor of law-based international order. So I imagine whatever Russia does not only has to conform with domestic Russian law, but also international law. But I do agree, Ray, that Russia and China aren't going to be idle on this one. First of all, they can't afford to lose Iran. I mean, Russia has the north-south economic corridor. China has just opened up the new Silk Road. Iran is a member of BRICS. It's the linchpin of this Eurasian economic engine everybody wants to, build. And so to sit by idly and allow the United States and Israel and Europe, by extension, to pluck Iran out of the BRICS, or that would be the end of BRICS. BRICS would no longer be a viable entity. So they will do something. I don't think it's going to be as extreme as that, but I do know this, that Russian diplomats and Chinese diplomats are far more clever than I am. They know the region to a infinite degree better than I do, and they will find the appropriate pressure points to be placed. It'll be very interesting to see what the results of Arakchi. I think it's Arakchi. I don't know who's flying to Moscow to meet with the Russians, and I believe it will be a meeting with Putin. Very interesting to see what comes out of that and what decisions are made. Maybe Iran is ready to have a defense clause. Maybe they'll propose that, and then Russia, Putin would have to take it to parliament and all that stuff to get rid. But I think Putin could make that happen given the circumstances. But the bottom line is we have entered into a complicated game full of nuance, with hazards at every turn, and we're being guided by a literal idiot. And the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians are in the same game, and they're guided by people who are mature, rational, knowledgeable, capable, and most importantly, they believe in humanity, so that whatever they decide, they're doing it for the benefit of humanity, as opposed to the orange-faced buffoon who is in the White House today, who cares not for humanity, but only cares for himself.
Well,
Sorry, again, I apologize because I said I wasn't going to go down that route of insulting the president, but I'm beyond caring about this man anymore.
I don't know who you mean by this orange-haired buffoon. I call him a sociopath. That's worse than being a buffoon.
Yeah, but
Soci
that's a lot of syllables, and I'm a Marine, and I can't do that. So orange face buffoon,
All
that's
right,
within
I
my.
go with sociopath. Here's a mercurial, another big word, mercurial sociopath. Now, that's what the Russians now finally realize that they're up against.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Now, what's really interesting is that Putin revealed 3 days ago, openly in a major speech, that treaty that was 2.5 years in the making, the treaty between Russia and Iran, was not a mutual defense treaty like the one with North Korea, because the
Right.
Iranians wouldn't buy
Right.
that. The Iranians wanted to keep their flexibility because the U.S. seemed to be sincere in trying to work out a deal with them. They were negotiating, and the last thing they wanted to do was do a treaty with the arch rival, the Glavny Vrag, the main enemy, Russia. Okay, so Putin reveals all this. He says, in effect, they could have had the same kind of mutual defense treaty. And, they haven't even asked us for any weapons or anything like that. Very peculiar. So, what I'm saying here is that up until now, the Russians have been saying, look, we're really interested, but we're not involved because the Iranians didn't want us to be involved then. Whether they're going to be involved now is an open question. Now, what
But
else did I
Putin
want to
said,
say?
but Putin, just let me,
Yeah.
Putin said something very interesting yesterday. He said that Israel is an extension of Russia. He said many Israelis speak Russian, and so they are an extension of Russia. And now you know why Iran didn't enter into a mutual defense treaty with Russia. Because Iran knew the following. If this war starts and they have a mutual defense treaty with Russia and it becomes engaged with Israel, Russia will immediately intervene diplomatically to try and bring this conflict to an end. And the whole purpose of Iranian independence is to have this ballistic missile force that can break the back of Israel and reassert Iranian dominance on conventional deterrence by demonstrating to Israel that you pay a disproportionate price when you attack Iran. That would not be able to be demonstrated if they had a mutual. The Iranians are smarter than anybody realizes because they've known for some time now that these negotiations would fail, that Israel would attack, and they would have to carry out a campaign to break Israel's back, which is what they're doing right now. They would not be allowed to carry out this campaign if they had a mutual defense treaty with Russia, because Russia would be intervening because Israel is an extension of Russia, and Russia cannot sit back idly while an extension of Russia is being pounded by missiles.
Right. So the point I'm trying to make is that the Iranians were naive in thinking that they could talk to the Americans. They too were obviously betrayed, okay? Just like the Russians have been betrayed, boom, 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 all down the line here. So let's broaden this out just a little bit more. BRICS. I think you're absolutely right, Scott. BRICS is the future. And the other BRICS members can't let Iran be decimated or regime changed, if I can use that word. But even before the next BRICS meeting, I think it's next month, we have the NATO summit in 2 days, if my memory serves, it's early in the morning. My God. What do you think is going to happen there? It's in The Hague, if I recall correctly, and the coalition of the brain dead, France, Germany, England, and maybe Poland. They'll all be there. Will they be rejoicing at this turn of events, or is there any good sense left in any of these European leaders that will put the brakes on what Trump might intend to do? The other thing, of course, is this the final summit for NATO? Will Trump wreck the whole thing? And the implications of that are immense, not just to mention Article 5 of the treaty. My God, what do you think is going to happen in The Hague in just a couple of days?
Well, we know what's not going to happen. The Ukraine, whatever they called it, there's a special Ukraine meeting that happens at every NATO meeting where Zelensky is brought forward and everybody kowtows to him and hands him money and says great praises of him. That's been canceled. Because NATO doesn't want to irritate Trump. They say it's because they want to give Trump latitude in his negotiations with Russia. But the bottom line is NATO is dysfunctional right now when it comes to Ukraine. And that's one of the realities. Two, if they thought that they were going to spend the NATO summit praising Donald Trump and trying to appeal to his ego to get him to continue to support their cause while putting pressure on Russia, Trump's not even talking Russia right now. He's singularly focused on this Iran issue. And you're going to see Europe be a little bit split on this. Yes, we have Starmer and Merz and others making absurd statements about, the need to do this, but I don't think NATO's unified on this. So I think you're going to see a dysfunctional NATO, a divided NATO, and I think you may be onto something because Trump is a narcissistic egomaniac. And if the world isn't revolving around Trump, he walks away from the world. And look what he did at the G7. He came in there and Emmanuel Macron dared mention the word ceasefire at a time when Donald Trump was committed to this military action. He had already made the decision to bomb Iran. There was no debate. The decision was made. All they were doing is playing games, deception games. And Macron said, "What about the ceasefire?" And he said, "That's ridiculous." And he walked away, stormed out. He will storm out of NATO. There is no chance this NATO summit is a success. There's every chance that it devolves into finger pointing, shouting, recrimination. And from your lips to God's ear, would this be the last NATO summit ever? I've said a long time ago that NATO is the death of NATO. It's over. Now we're just waiting. NATO's in hospice, and we're just waiting for the nurses to come and pull the plug. Maybe they'll hang on like Saddam Hussein's uncle, Adnan Karila did. The Israelis were waiting for him to die so they could assassinate Saddam. And that son of a bitch just kept staying in the hospital, living until he finally died. Maybe that'll be NATO just sitting there, breathing air in, but not thinking because they've never thought. But it's done. NATO's in hospice. The plug will be pulled. It's the end of NATO. And it's the end of Europe as we currently know it. The world is going to change, Ray, if we can survive. If we can survive.
Big. And that's big. NATO is terminal. Okay. Now, one thing the audience might not know is that Trump came in swinging there at that G7, used to be G8 in Canada. He says, "Hey, you guys, this should be G8. Used to be G8. Why did you kick the Russians out? For God's sake, that was stupid. And the Chinese should be in here. I mean, that's not a bad idea at all. Why don't you do that? Oh my God, So he came in swinging. Now, what he was saying is that the G7 is not worth a damn without Russia and China. Now, translate that in an obverse way to Ukraine. This summit, just a couple of days away, is going to say, well, how about Ukraine into NATO? Some people think it needs to be into NATO, that the path towards NATO is irresistible. That's the last NATO document, okay? Do we still feel that? Should Ukraine be in NATO or not? Now, this similarity is a little funny, but here we have Russia, China should be in the G8, G9, and Ukraine shouldn't be in NATO. I think the whole NATO thing is going to fall apart in an obvious way just on Tuesday or Wednesday, if I have my dates right, in The Hague. And this is one key aspect of the correlation of forces because Trump, he's pretty much alone out there. He doesn't need these coalition of the brain dead. But by the same token, he's pretty alone. Who's he got with him? Papua and New Guinea and some of the, and Israel, of course. I don't know. It's going to be interesting at the UN as well. So we have meetings coming up. God forbid we have nukes before those meetings. Those meetings may have an impact on decisions made in Moscow, in Beijing, and in Washington.
Yeah, the isolation of the United States is real. I don't think MAGA has woken up to the impact. I don't think the American people have woken up to the impact. It's not fair to blame it solely on Donald Trump. America has been doing a good job of alienating itself from the world for decades now. But Trump has, he has delivered a master class in how to be, how to make yourself globally hated, reviled. We're not deemed as the necessary nation, or what was the term that Madeleine Albright like to say? We are the not the irreplaceable, but the
indispensable.
Indispensable. Yes, we are so dispensable right now. It's not even even funny. The Chinese can dispense with us as will. The Russians think we're a joke. I mean, the Russians were being kind, saying, "Yeah, we could do business with you." But did you hear Peskov speak the other day at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum? Um, all the people that think they're coming to Russia, you're not. If you left, you're not coming back. We have our partners, and we're going to work with our partners, but we're not letting anybody else in. We have a good thing going on here, and you're not welcome back. Russia doesn't need the United States. They don't need Europe. They've built something better. And the United States continues to walk around as if the whole world needs us. China proved they don't need us. I mean, the back down that Trump did on tariffs is proof positive that he has no leverage over China. The reverse is the true. And China gave us mercy because out of goodwill. How much goodwill is going to be left in the world because of what the United States has done? The American people are going to learn some very harsh lessons very soon about the
Yeah.
price of being irresponsible. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would just say that we have proven not to be indispensable, but we have proved ourselves to be exceptional. There's no denying that US is
That's true. That's
exceptional,
true.
but not quite the way that the world would give it any
That's the
respect.
that's the third definition in Webster's dictionary. We like to believe we're the first definition of the word exceptional. Da da da. It means this, but then you work your way down. It says it also means you're exceptionally bad.
Yeah.
We've reached that level. We're the yeah.
And that matters. And that is something that Vladimir Putin pointed out. Yeah, I'll just remind people, this is one cagey, pretty smart guy, right? So back in the day, and I'm just going back to 2013, for God's sake, what's that? Just 12 years ago, if math is right, okay? Putin
Blink of an
pulled,
eye.
is that right? Okay. Putin pulled Obama's chestnuts out of the fire. All these crazy neocons were saying you have to strike Syria because they used chemical weapons outside Damascus. You got to do it. Obama goes up to St. Petersburg without John Kerry and without his neocon advisors, and Putin takes him by the shoulder and says, "Look, you don't want to make a war in Syria. I applaud that. I don't want that either. I got a way out here. We have persuaded the Syrians to destroy all what's left of their chemical weapons. How about that? Okay. Now, long story short, that prevented a war. Obama bought it. Why could he not buy it? Okay. It was destroyed under UN supervision on a special ship outfitted to destroy chemical weapons. What happened? On the 12th of September, while all this was going down, Putin wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. Now, what he said was this, and pay attention because this was the apogee of US-Russian relations over the last couple of decades. He said, "I really appreciate the trust that has grown, not between just our two nations, but also between President Obama and me. I think we can build on that to create conditions for more peace. But," it's a quite extraordinary. This is the last paragraph. But he said just last week in a major speech that the U.S. is exceptional. I disagree with that, says Putin in this last paragraph. I think there are all kinds of nations, the big ones, small ones, closer to democracy. But when the good Lord looks at all these nations, he thinks them equal. Okay? So right then, at the apogee of their relationship, when Putin had pulled those chestnuts out of the fire, he was warning, "Look, for God's sake, don't screw it up." What happened? 8 months later, they screwed it up by overturning the
We
government in
do.
Kiev, and that was Obama's satraps, Victoria Nuland, and all those crazy guys. So from the apogee down to February 14, 2014, February, whatever it was, 2014, the most blatant coup in history, which it really was, advertised on YouTube 2.5 weeks before. Okay. And since then, it's been down until Trump seemed to realize that, well, wait a second, we're not going to win in Ukraine. Maybe we'll do a deal. Even that in my view, is now off the table. He's not going to be, he's not going to even want to, much less have the latitude, Putin, to deal with this guy who's so mercurial and starts wars of aggression. Now, this happened. This means, I mean, this has meaning. Scott quoted what a war of aggression is. Nuremberg said the war of aggression is the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes only inasmuch as it contains the accumulated evil of the whole. Think torture. Think all the other things that are going not only on in the various wars, but think genocide, for God's sake. So, my God, uh, Scott has been in the forefront, getting citizens from both countries together, Russians and Americans. He's been in the forefront of getting out against his earlier inclinations to demonstrate, to get out off our rear ends and do something about this. And I'll just repeat what, who was it? I think it was Rabbi Heschel said way back when evil happens in the world, we're not all guilty, but we are all responsible. Um, Sitting around and being neutral in such circumstances is to be on the side of the oppressor. That's why we have to get off our rear ends and get out there. And I applaud you, Scott, for doing more than rhetoric. You do a hell of a lot more than rhetoric. Let's all do a hell of a lot more than rhetoric.
Well,
I just want to
Ray,
add on what Ray said there. When just real quick to emphasize, Putin has admitted he's had one failing. I mean, he probably has admitted to several, but he's publicly admitted to one failing. And it's the failing of Russia. And that's to be naive in belief that the United States was a sincere partner. The Russians always knew we were an imperfect partner. The Russians always knew that we were tainted by this concept of exceptionalism. But Russia sought to work with us, believing that maybe we didn't believe our own rhetoric, that we could be rational when the time came. But he has been repeatedly disappointed in the United States, and Russia has been. If you meet with the Russians, there's a deep sadness when they talk about the United States because they truly wanted and want to live in peace and harmony with the United States as a friend, as an equal. But what they're coming to the realization, and this is the realization that you have when you have a family member who has disappointed you, who maybe got in trouble with the law, and you took them to rehabilitation, and you took them to drug, drug and rehabilitation, whatever that and you gave them every opportunity, and over again you find them in the ditch, or you bail them out of jail, and you bring them home. But at some point in time, you come to the realization that while we love this person, there's no salvation for this person. This person is not going to change. And they're just a disappointment. And I think Russia's reached this point with the United States because this isn't just about Trump. The mistake we make is saying that all the ails between Russia and the United States is about Trump. It's about us. It's about America. It's about the people who have allowed themselves to be infected with Russophobia. It's about academic institutions that sustain the Russophobia. It's about a deep state that can only exist because of Russophobia and the fear generating the policies put on. And I think the Russians have reached the point now where they have to let the exceptional America go. That they're not going to be there to bail us out. They're not going to walk around with their arms on our shoulders. They're not going to try and help find solutions. What their job is right now is to allow their lives to go on and not be dragged down the pit by this diseased individual known as America. And this is a sad state of affairs. And I say that as an American who has desperately tried. Joe, you were with me just Wednesday, where we were trying to engage in a citizen summit. And we did engage in a citizen summit. It was a success. But there were two things out of that. One was the fact that just days before we did this summit was supposed to be complementary to an overall policy of the United States of diplomatic engagement with Russia. Trump pulled the plug on diplomatic engagement with Russia. And so now what we did Wednesday is the only, I mean, this is sort of something we could be proud of, although it's very sad, Joe. What we did on Wednesday is the only citizen to citizen contact of note being taken between the United States and Russia today. Um, so we can be proud of this, but the fact of the matter is the Russians there said something very telling. Do you remember, Joe, where they said, "How can we trust you? How can we ever
Yep.
trust you again?" And then they put the challenge out that the onus isn't on them to trust us. The onus is on us to take actions that can regain their trust. And my God, I just published something, Project 38, where I was, I'm still going to do it, but the idea is to go forward and create the conditions in which we can engage the Russians responsibly on arms control. But you have to rebuild trust. You have to, create the conditions for trust. And then Trump pulls this stunt in Iran that destroys, eliminates any potential of that. I have never been more, and I apologize earlier for raising my voice. I'm just very frustrated, very angry. Um, I am not somebody who often gets overwhelmed with feelings of hopelessness. You know me, I'm a fighter. It doesn't matter how bad the situation gets. I wake up in the morning, say, what can we do? How can we attack, close with and destroy the enemy? How can we overcome it? I am filled with despair right now. I know I'm going to get over this because I always do. But what we have done in Iran is just so mind-boggling, evil and bad and stupid, and the consequences we don't even understand what the consequences are, and it destroys everything we were trying to do with peace. It damages it. Not, I can't say destroy because I'm not giving up, but the damage that Trump's actions have done to what we all, Joe, you, me, everybody, have been working for, this trying to find a path towards peaceful coexistence. This damage is real. I'm not yet willing to call it fatal, but it hurts. Trump has hurt us. He has hurt our cause, and it has led me to despair. So I apologize earlier for getting emotional. As you said, what was the sin that America has? Emotionalism.
Overload. Yeah, that's what
Overload,
Piskov.
emotional overload.
Yeah,
Yes,
emotional
I'm
overload.
guilty of
That
that.
was. No, listen. This is very serious stuff. Okay, anger is a virtue. None other than Thomas Aquinas defined anger, just enough anger. Okay, Pythagorean sort of in the virtue is in the middle. Okay, too much anger, no good. That's iracundia in Latin. Okay, too little milk, Mr. Milk Toast. No, anger is a virtue. So, uh, you know, Scott, you're being virtuous. Okay, and anger has a place. Now, what do I talk about also just briefly is trust. I talked about trust. I mentioned that on the 12th of September 2013, Putin himself talked about increasing trust between our two countries and between our two presidents. Well, that's shattered now, okay? But trust is important. And I had a unique opportunity to consult with one of Gorbachev's chief advisors when Jim Baker came into Moscow and promised the Russians, Gorbachev and Shevardnadze, we won't move NATO 1 inch to the east. I saw Kuvaldin, one of his right-hand persons there, an academic, turned out. I was at a cocktail party about 9 years ago in Moscow, and I said, Mr. Kuvaldin, tell me, why didn't you get that thing written down, that promise? And he looked at me now. He said, well, Mr. McGovern, uh, I'll give you the usual reasons. The Germans hadn't bought in completely yet, and the Warsaw Pact, for God's sake, still existed. But here's the real reason, Mr. McGovern. We trusted you. Bummer. Okay. Now, is there any trust left? Well, there's not much trust left, but there is a pretty cool, calm, and collected person in Moscow still, Mr. Putin. Now, what else? I was there last month, and when you travel with someone like Oliver Stone, you get to meet some very, very important people. It was Oliver who ordered me to ask Scott to write a piece on arms control, which I delivered to, well, to some very high people, okay? But what I want to say is that at dinner given by the next to the highest official that you can get, okay? He was given, McGovern got to go because he was with Oliver Stone, right? After a while, this fellow looks at me and he says, Mr. McGovern, you're a specialist on Russia. You have been for decades. You're a Russian area specialist. You have degrees here. How come you don't hate Russia? Oh my God. And I said to myself, oh, oh, damn. Uh, and I had to explain. I did all this studying in the 60s and even in the 50s before academe went down the drain and was peopled by people like Brzezinski and Richard Pipes, people who hated Russia. They drew Russophobia from their mother's milk, for God's sake. And I tried to explain, look, area studies. I learned Russian literature. I learned Russian history. I learned the Russian language. I taught the Russian. So it was different with me. And I'm feeling very privileged to say I don't hate Russia. Once you know about Russia, you can't hate Russia. So last thing I'll say here, neither could John F. Kennedy hate Russia. And that was months after he almost tried to destroy Russia at the behest of his military in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, that was October 1962. In June 1963, he made a major speech, which you all know about, but maybe the audience doesn't. It was his peace speech, and he said, look, we share much with Russia. There is never anything that has come really wedged between us. We hope for the same things for our children. And listen, almost unique in history, our two great power nations have never been at war one with the other. Well, that happens to be the fact. Matter of fact, the Russians bailed us out during the Civil War. Nobody knows about that. They helped us during the Revolutionary War. Nobody knows about that. I know about that. Scott knows about that. Joe, you know about that. So what we need to do is kind of try to educate our fellow American citizens, as you and Scott did just this week, and say, look, it's different than what they're telling you. We can get along with these people. And the worst, of course, is that it's an uphill challenge, but you're not going to stop, right, Scott? And Joe, you're going to give us the vehicle to tell the truth. That's the hope here. I'm not totally despairing here. I think we have to accent the policy as long as we accent the positive. And this little session this morning, tired as I am, was, I think, very positive. Joe, I thank you. And I thank you, Scott. And don't worry about raising your voice. Sometimes I do that myself. I am Irish, after all.
I hope
You are Irish.
I have a few seconds to ask some more questions, if you don't mind. First, I wanted to mention that at the Citizen Summit, I had a chance to speak to the people in St. Petersburg, and I mentioned the American University speech of Kennedy, in which he was trying to end the Cold War. What I was saying that the First Amendment is on the thread here. What I didn't finish saying was that that article I wrote about Kennedy's speech and the continuing humiliation that the subsequent presidents made of Russia cannot be posted on Facebook. That's just an example of the First Amendment issue that we had here. But what I wanted to ask is, you mentioned that op-ed that Putin wrote at that time. It was 3 months before the Maidan overthrow of Yanukovych that the JCPOA negotiations began, November 2013. Can you imagine today? That included U.S., Britain, France, and Germany, with China and Russia, came together to make that nuclear deal. Could you imagine now that kind of wise diplomacy being possible? It's not possible anymore. But even though the Maidan coup took place, the negotiations of the nuclear deal between the West and Russia and China continued. Well, we have lost that ability right now. But I wanted to ask now, Scott, you talked about Israel wanting to lure the U.S. back into this. war after this strike last night by the United States. It sounded like the tone and some of the things that Trump said was, this is it. He wants to end it here. Now, my question to both of you is it wise now for Iran not to strike back at the U.S., to the many 40,000 U.S. troops in the region on those bases, to let it end there, to not dignify a response to what the U.S. did last night, which, as we discussed earlier, really did no damage? Do you think that Iran will let it go, Scott?
Well, what I heard from the president, because now we have learned not to trust him, he didn't say that it ends here. He said that we're done for the moment, but now Iran must surrender. And if Iran doesn't surrender, then I will come back in with even more terrible weapons. So, the fact of the matter is the United States has left the door open for expanded military action, and we have resources deploying into the region. What should Iran do? I think it's in Iran's interest to prevent direct American involvement beyond the scope and scale of what America has already done. What America did was a meaningless strike. We bombed 3 empty sites. We didn't accomplish anything. Nothing of damage. No damage was done to Iran. The United States, by undertaking this action, has created a tremendous amount of uncertainty globally. As Ray and I had discussed, we don't know what Russia and China are going to do, but we know they're going to do something. We know that the international community is going to do something. We anticipate a level of dysfunction in NATO because of this strike. The United States will find itself increasingly isolated. So it's important that Iran try to define what the problem is here. Iran should continue to strike Israel as hard as possible. Israel must pay a price for the crime of perfidy, for attacking Iran. And so long as Israel continues to believe it has a right to continue to strike Iran, Iran must strike back. Iran must win this aspect of the fight. On the nuclear side, I think it's important for Iran to give the international community a chance to rally around the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. It would be very important to have the IAEA issue very harshly worded condemnation of the United States for its attack against Iran's nuclear infrastructure. It would be very important for Russia and China to reinforce the importance of a viable nuclear nonproliferation regime. And there's a couple reasons why I believe this is important for Iran to do. One, Iran must not allow this ongoing discussion to be solely focused on its enrichment. If it gets into we have to be allowed to enrich, America says we don't, and that's what this war is about, I think that's problematic. Iran needs allies, and those allies need to be talking about nuclear nonproliferation in a way that leads the conversation to Israel's nuclear arsenal. And I really do believe that there's an opportunity now, and the world will pick up on this. You already hear hints from Medvedev that he has, condemned Israel's nuclear arsenal and the inconsistencies of the application of the NPT. There's an opportunity for Iran here, if they do this properly, to have the focus put on Israel, not Iran. And Israel will, if they can keep America out of this, Israel, I believe, will eventually break and say, we have to stop this. The Netanyahu government will collapse, and a new government will come in that says, we have to stop this striking, this attack. And if they do that, they are, now the conditions can be put on by the world, not Iran. If the world starts to say, yes, but it's your nuclear program that's the problem, not Iran's nuclear program, we can get the world to focus on bringing Israel into the fold. This is possible because for the first time ever in a conflict of this nature, the United States, while Trump may posture with his rhetoric as some sort of magnificent leader, the United States is actually operating from a position of extreme weakness. Look at the statement that came out of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia today that plays host to about 60% of America's strike potential in the region. Saudi Arabia said, this is wrong. You shouldn't have done this. And if you think that Saudi Arabia is now going to allow its bases to be used to stage military strikes against Iran, think again. So Iran needs to play to these emotions that have come in, continue to adhere to the rule of international law, and work with the Russians and the Chinese to isolate Israel and to keep America from re-engaging on this conflict. I just was scrolling. I apologize because my wife always yells at me when I do this. So while I'm in the middle of a podcast, to scroll the headlines, but I feel I have to here. The United States is now formally engaged with China to get China to convince the Iranians not to shut the Strait of Hormuz. Um, at the same time, Iran has increased its jamming of the GPS navigation systems that are used to help guide ships through the Strait of Hormuz. So, we're at a very critical decision point there. But the question here is what leverage can China get from the United States if China comes in and says, okay, we're willing to do this, but you got to back down. You have to back away. You can't re-engage. So this is diplomacy. This is the kind of engagement that's taking place. The United States is waking up to the fact that Iran can destroy our economy overnight. I mean, we are an economic basket case right now. I'm not an economist. I have been buying some of the books from people who are smarter than me to try and figure out how to spell economics, and maybe even fake that I can talk about it. But I do know this. I do know energy security, and I do know that there is a cascading detrimental impact to the economy of the United States when the price of fuel goes up, but more importantly, and this is something we experienced earlier, if you remember during the pandemic when we had that energy crisis where actually it cost people, oil became not just worthless, but expensive to hold on to, meaning that if you held on to oil, you had to pay people money because nobody wanted the oil. Um, Diesel. Diesel is the most important factor here for the American economy. And if we are denied access to diesel, our entire country shuts down. I can't go to Walmart anymore because Walmart is empty. I can't buy food at Price Chopper anymore because the shelves are empty. Um, and that is a threat I think that people are starting to tell Trump about. And so I think China has some leverage here to say we can prevent that outcome, but you did your thing. You did your big muscle flexing. Now you need to back off and let this thing play out. So we'll see. I don't know.
Ray, how do you think you respond? Yeah.
Now, I agree with Scott, what he just said. I just realizing that I earlier meant to set my alarm for 8 o'clock this morning so I could hear what that new head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff,
Raising Cain.
Pete Higgs, yeah, Raising Cane, Pete Higgs said. But maybe it's better that I kept my anger down. Just to say that the imbeciles that have been leading our military for the last couple of decades. I mean, I don't think they even went to basic infantry officer school where I learned basic things about, what you do and what you don't do. So that's a fly in the ointment. What kind of advice is Raising Cain giving to the president? Now, with respect to what you asked about, I agree with Scott. I think that it would be better for Iran not to strike out at U.S. bases in the immediate vicinity, although they could easily do that, and they may not have control over Shia Muslim people who will do that anyway without any permission from Iran. So that's a danger, okay? Now, what else? If, as I'm told, reliably, I think, that Iran has a plethora of hypersonic missiles that there is no defense against and is shooting them or firing them at Israel to a fare thee well, Israel can get destroyed. Whoa, destroyed. Now, not only that, but the Patriot missiles, the HIMARS, and all these very sophisticated air defense systems that the U.S. has given Israel don't work. Okay? That's a major factor. So if, as I've been told, Iran can pretty much attrit Israel to almost destroying it, that's a big factor here. What else? Well, I just want to emphasize that what Russia and China do right now is going to be key. If there's any sense left in among Trump's supporters or his advisors, we can avoid the worst. But that's the big question. Uh, Tulsi Gabbard, some of us kind of thought that, well, she knows at least which end is up. But will she act this way? She's caved. So who else is going to stand up to Trump and to Raising Cane and say, this is really stupid? I don't know, and neither do the Russians, and neither do the Chinese, and that spells danger.
Well, apparently the chairman of the Joint Chiefs severely damaged the nuclear facilities, so he seems to be pushing that.
Yeah,
that line.
Raising Cane. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I'm tired too. I was getting ready to interject with perhaps the most wise thing I was going to say all day, but it just escaped my mind. So I'm
sorry.
I'm going to regroup. No, it's not your fault.
We'll bring you back. But I think that the point Ray's making about it, this war of attrition. The Wall Street Journal reported last week that they're running out of interceptor missiles, Israel. Their economy, they're losing $200 million a day. The airport is shut down. The port in Haifa is shut down. I don't even know if you can get out by the Allenby Bridge to Jordan. The economy of Israel is going to collapse. The longer Israel, it seems from Iran's point of view, would be wise to continue what they're doing right now and not mess around striking back at the U.S. And one of the lie I think that Trump repeated in his speech last night is this idea that Netanyahu and the Israelis have been saying for a long time that Iran is the number one sponsor of terrorism in the world. No, we know that those are Sunni Arabs who are, and it's the U.S. that are allied with them. But if Iran continues what they're doing now, and they have as many missiles as people think they have, and they could be getting more from China and Russia as well, by the way. That's something that could be going on without Russia getting directly involved, of course, that it looks like playing the long game, Iran might have the advantage here.
Joe,
there's no doubt about that.
I had the kind of thought that, am I on? Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
I
you
had
are.
the thought that escaped Scott's mind. Scott, when you're real old like me, they escape your mind all the time. So be thankful.
Not a lot going on.
Here's my thought. False flag. The conditions are incredibly ripe for a false flag attack sponsored by Israelis and the blame being put on the Iranians against one of those three sitting ducks. I call them sitting ducks. That's what they are. They're aircraft carriers. They belong to the last century, for God's sake. They don't have to sink them. All you have to do is kill a bunch of sailors on those ships. We used to talk about it was a good thing. You get your ducks in a row, right? Well, not this time. You got three sitting ducks in a row. Now, they're interspersed, of course. They're not together. But what I fear is that chances are probably better than even now that in extremis, or even before, Israel will sponsor a false flag attack on a U.S. base or a U.S. carrier or a U.S. ship of some other kind, and then Trump will be deprived of any option to be sensible. He'll have to go in again with more bunker busters and finish the job as if he could. So that's what worries me now. My great thought was false flag. I think it's likely. Let me just add one thing. I said this a week ago. I wrote a note to the skipper of the USS Nimitz, who had just been ordered to bring his aircraft carrier into the Persian Gulf area. And I said, look, if you get a missile, you get an attack, please note the direction from which it comes and whether it might be a false flag. And I got more than 500,000 hits on that tweet. So
I see.
it hit it, yeah, more than half. I don't usually get that. Scott gets that all the time. So anyhow,
It's not
maybe
like
the
Israel hasn't done
maybe
this
the
before. It's
yeah,
not like
sure.
Israel hasn't done it before at Liberty, USS Liberty 2.0, we're looking at perhaps. No, I want to ask about regime change here because some people talk about the MEK being able to do this. The U.S. is not going to send hundreds of thousands of troops to occupy and overthrow the government. The Israelis seem to think they're playing chess here. If you kill the leader, the game's over. Well, that's not the case because every time they assassinate someone, they were being replaced. How could there be a regime change in Iran if there were to be one?
Well, we've already executed that plan, the summer of 2023. Um, I had the privilege of being in a meeting with President Raisi, the Iranian president, in September of 2023, and he surprised me when he started off with a presentation about what had just transpired. He said that, if people, just to refresh people's memory, Iran was on fire in the summer of 2023 because of it began with the tragic death of a Kurdish girl, young lady, who died in police custody. The circumstances of the death are, still nebulous, but it was sufficient enough to get people into the street protesting hijabi laws and things of that nature. Um, and what he said is this was legitimate protest. It was interesting in him to say that. He said, the the government had created conditions that were unacceptable to the people, and the people were demonstrating, and this was their legitimate right. He said the problem came when foreign powers sought to exploit this demonstration and pile on. And the MEK did, the Arabs in the Avaz region did, the Azeris did, the Kurds did, the Baluch did, the monarchists did. Basically, every foreign-funded opposition group rose up in a coordinated fashion to set Iran on fire and to bring down the regime. But then what he said, because this was all known, he said it almost worked. He said that our government was under the greatest threat that it had experienced since the Iran-Iraq War, that this was a very real threat, a concerted threat, and it was a real danger to us. He said, but we beat it. We gathered together, we rallied the nation, and we defeated it. So we know what the regime change model is, and that's what they're trying to replicate now. They're trying to create a condition of societal collapse, a disconnect between the people and the government, or to eliminate the government and leave the people wandering leaderless, and then repeat what they did. This is why the Iranians yesterday, I believe, they've mobilized the Basij, the militia. They've mobilized them. They are now out there because they're not going to let this happen. And the other mistake that's been made is that the Iranian people, rather than being afraid or disconnected with the leader, they are more united today than ever. I mean, it's anecdotal. You never know what you're seeing on the internet, but for a while there, the Iranians were putting out videos of women in Tehran, in northern Tehran, because I don't think this takes place everywhere in Iran, but in northern Tehran, the women had just discarded the hijab, and they were walking around in the malls, on the streets, free of interference, because the Iranian government doesn't want a repeat of this. And yet you see one of these women without the hijab surrounded by conservative women condemning Israel and praising the government and saying how Iran is Iran and they will be there. So any hope of creating the conditions for the collapse of this regime through societal collapse, political dysfunction, etc., is gone. That doesn't mean there isn't a danger that they're going to repeat trying to bring up all of these different groups. But remember, it was just 2 years ago that these groups did rise up and they were crushed. They were crushed by the Iranian regime. And so the idea that they're going to suddenly be able to reconstitute in a cohesive, coherent fashion to bring a threat on is fantasy. I mean, it doesn't mean that the CIA and MI6 and the Dutch, because the Dutch are heavily involved, are going to lose this fantasy. It just means that the tools that they think they have no longer are there. We see the monarchists. They are, the Pahlavi's is it son out there making fanciful notions about the return of the
Claimed
peacock
Virginia.
throne. Yeah,
He
yeah, but
claimed Virginia.
it's never going to happen. If he steps one foot into Iran, he will be strung up by the neck until dead. There is no support at all, other than CIA-funded cells that do propaganda things like go in and paint things on. They get on roofs and they shout out and they make a video and put it out there as if there's opposition. But the reality is, the Iranian people have rallied around the theocracy. So this is yet another failure on the part of Israel and the anti regime. I don't know. Did we lose Joe? Am I speaking in a vacuum?
No, we're
Okay,
still here.
Ray can hear me. Okay, I just lost Joe's video, so I don't
Hi
know.
guys, it's Kathy.
I'm back. I'm back. I'm back.
Okay.
Great.
So
Okay,
anyway, I wanted to thank both of you guys. Unless you have any final remarks, we could wrap up what has turned out to be an hour and 45 minutes.
Wow.
I,
So my final
I just want to
remark,
say real quick to double on with Ray. If you have Russian area studies and real Russian area studies, it's impossible to learn to hate Russia. That's the beauty of embracing the reality of Russia, because you will fall in love with Russia, and that's why I continue to pursue that. And I think it's time that we apply that same philosophy to Iran. I have had the privilege of traveling in Iran and meeting the Iranian people. And they are as cultured, they are as educated a group of people as you'll ever meet. Their hearts are sincere, warm, open. I remember walking through the streets. Oh gosh, there goes my brain again. There's an Iranian city near Natanz, an ancient city, Kashan, I think it is. And I was there, and they had the Rose Festival, and I was walking. There was a family there, and I came up, and and everywhere you go, they're offering you free food. I mean, there's just such warm people. Um, and there was a family there, and the guy looked at me, and he said, "You're Scott Ritter." I said, "Yes." He goes, "Wow, you're in Kashan." I said, "Yes." And he goes, "Well, I'm so and so." And I said, "Well, what do you do?" And he goes, "My, I work at Natanz. I'm uh, I'm not really supposed to be talking to you, but I just wanted to say hi and wish you the very best, and wish you success at whatever it is you're trying to do." He introduced me to his family, and once we started talking, the whole city seemed to converge around us, not in hostility, but in love. So I honestly believe that if we learn about Iran, the real Iran, and not allow, like in Russophobia, we allow certain anti-Russian elements that have created a diaspora in America to define what Russia is, as opposed to going to the source itself. Rather than allowing the Iranian diaspora to dictate to us their vision of, pro-Shah theory, if we get to know the Iranian people, I'm in contact with them consistently on these are wonderful people, and I just think that's the key, Ray. That we have Russian area studies, but we need to have Iranian area studies, because I truly believe that if we do it right, we will fall in love with Iran, and we'll never want to engage in this stupidity that we're engaging in. And again, I don't know. I'm trying to end on a positive note. Thank you, Joe, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Over to
Thank
you,
you,
Ray.
Scott.
well,
Final
Joe,
word, Ray.
my final word is simply thank you. I learned a lot. Um, I respect Scott so much that when I learn new things, I assimilate them into what I thought I knew. And I just want to say that giving whoever is listening or watching or would watch later the opportunity to hear this kind of thing, well, I just think that's a unique contribution to our ability to figure out what's going on. So not all is lost. The major media is sinking, Consortium News and others are rising. Let's hope that there will come a day when people will learn from such as us. And I just want to say a sincere thanks.
Well, thank you again, Ray and Scott, for coming on today to talk about this developing story. So until next time, when we speak again about this or other issues, this is Joe Loria for CN Live saying goodbye.
Get out your notebook. There's more.
If you are a consumer of independent news, then the first place you should be going to is Consortium News, and please do try to support them when you can. It doesn't have its articles behind a paywall. It's free for everyone. It's one of the best news sites out there, and it's been in the business of independent journalism and adversarial independent journalism for over 2 decades. I hope that with the public's continuing support of Consortium News, it will continue for a very long time to come. Thank you so much.